And in sports, Man United knock out bitter rivals Liverpool from the English FA Cup to book a spot in the round of 16. In your top story this hour, rescuers have found 9 more bodies at a gold mine in eastern China's Shandong province, where 22 miners were trapped after an explosion 2 weeks ago. 11 trapped miners were rescued on Sunday and sent to hospital. One miner had already died of his injuries during the Sunday rescue, and one other is still missing. This according to a press briefing held just a short while ago. Right, let's turn to Mozambique now, where tropical cyclone Eloise has caused severe damage. Nearly 7,000 people have been displaced after thousands of homes were either destroyed or completely flooded. The cyclone hit the coastal province of Sofala on Saturday morning. The region's Buzi district is the worst affected. Severe winds and heavy rains have ruined over 130,000 hectares of crops. These initial numbers from the National Institute for Disaster Risk Management could rise after the full extent of the damage is known. Since making landfall, Eloise has weakened and headed inland to dump rain on Zimbabwe, Eswatini and South Africa. Now, the 51st World Economic Forum starts today. And this year's event, billed as the Davos Agenda, takes place virtually due to the COVID-19 pandemic. More than 2,000 global leaders are set to meet this week to tackle the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic and other global challenges. Forum founder Klaus Schwab said 2021 would be a year to emerge from the pandemic as more resilient, more inclusive and more sustainable. Well, the African continent, like much of the world, is keenly watching the Davos agenda this week as economies struggle under the weight of the coronavirus pandemic. Let's now bring in Professor Siphamandla Zondi from the Department of Politics at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. He joins us live via Zoom. Professor, thank you so much for your time today. To begin with, what can the African continent expect from this gathering of the World Economic Forum?
Good morning and good morning to the viewers. What the continent can expect is a set of ideas about how the continent might manage its economic recovery after the devastation of COVID-19, which comes as the continent are still battling the impact of the global financial crisis. It may, secondly, expect finding networks that are critical for the continent to do that, including financial networks. Thirdly, it might be able to find partners there who are willing to invest in Africa's recovery. And fourthly, perhaps some form of consensus in respect of perhaps forgiving Africa's debt, because it can become a burden on Africa's ability to build back better after.
Right, we do apologize for that. We seem to have lost Professor Siphamandla Zondi talking to us there from Johannesburg. But let's continue giving you the African perspective on this, or rather, let's now go to news from Nigeria, where the country's President Muhammadu Buhari has called on West African states to do more to end terrorism and violent extremism in the region. He raised the issue during a virtual session of the regional bloc ECOWAS. Parts of West Africa have been hit by violence in recent years, and that's led to a rising death toll and displacement of millions of people. CGTN's Deju Badmus has more.
As expected, security and the COVID-19 pandemic featured prominently in the agenda of the virtual meeting of the regional leaders. The meeting comes at a time when the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, says the number of people fleeing violence in West Africa's Sahel region has hit a record 2 million people. Much of the violence is blamed on jihadist groups like Al-Qaeda, Islamic State and Boko Haram. The Nigerian president, whose speech was read by the country's foreign minister at the meeting, told his fellow heads of state in the region that it was time to step up action.
The increase in the spate of violent attacks by terrorists and other criminal elements across the region is worrisome. It is now more important than ever for the region to work together and combat this menace. The region needs to commence immediate implementation of the ECOWAS Action Plan on the fight against terrorism. We urge member states to pay their voluntary contributions into the fund dedicated to the implementation of the 2020-2024 Action Plan.
Another big challenge that the region faces is the COVID-19 pandemic. The coronavirus is spreading faster across the continent, and some countries in the region like Nigeria are battling a second wave. Mortality and infection rates have also gone up, while the wait for the arrival of COVID-19 vaccines continues.
Now that vaccines are soon to be available, I call on all member states to ensure that we prioritize the acquisition of the vaccines for our citizens, while at the same time increasing efforts to develop our own vaccines so that we can build herd immunity against the COVID-19 pandemic in West Africa. Efforts should also be accelerated for the region to start producing rapid diagnostic test kits of international standards to be made available to all member states. It is important for the region to evolve effective measures and avoid total lockdown at this critical time that our economies are gradually recovering from the first wave of the pandemic.
The economy of the region is already reeling from the effects of the pandemic. This has made it more difficult for ECOWAS member countries to fund the regional body, and some, like Nigeria, are pushing for the downsizing of the administrative structure of ECOWAS to reflect the current economic realities. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Well, let's return now to our coverage of the World Economic Forum that is taking place. Of course, this year it is a virtual event, and that is due to the coronavirus pandemic. The main focus will be on how the world recovers from the pandemic and, of course, how economies might recover from a very tough year indeed. Africa, like much of the world, is paying close attention to events at this year's World Economic Forum. CGTN's Angela Coppola now brings us this preview on Davos from a South African perspective.
The organizers say the aim of the virtual meeting is to restore trust and engage all stakeholders in business, government, civil society and beyond to help build a more peaceful and prosperous post-corona era.
So one, definitely a conversation in terms of, yes, post-corona, but I think currently, how do we get more equitable vaccine distribution? Secondly, how do we get a bigger focus in terms of the environment? And thirdly, how do we start to kickstart and create, they call it, more resilient economic systems?
There's some skepticism about the World Economic Forum and the meeting's theme.
The expectation now that they'll be talking about a post-COVID world is a bit premature, even though I think we should hold them to their word. I think what we need now is not just restore confidence in institutions, but also get the money to do it. And so the Davos summit is important only because it's the movers and shakers globally who have the resources to put to the table.
Africa has 1/5 of the global population, and some argue that the continent should play a more prominent role in discussions.
So I do think there's critical talking points, critical agenda points that are relevant to Africa. One, regional cooperation. Two, more inclusive access in terms of the fourth industrial revolution. Three, how do we create more interdependency and relationship from a trade and investment perspective and the flows coming into Africa? And four, and very importantly, how do we collaborate more effectively around vaccine distribution and the cost of vaccine, but then also healthcare more broadly?
There's a widely held belief that African leaders get more done at the continental WEF meetings that happen annually rather than at Davos.
I think Africa benefits to the extent that if we have people like President Cyril Ramaphosa going there and talking about issues that are of significance to Africa, I think I'm not really diminishing its significance. But I think the more important ones are the ones that are held in Africa.
The unique circumstances that Davos takes place in this year are a good opportunity for the world's leaders to come together to solve some of those major issues they're facing. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, let's take a short break now. Here's what's still ahead on the program. WhatsApp users in Africa react to a new data privacy policy. And concerns rise over a second wave of locust invasion in eastern Kenya as crops are destroyed. Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories. Let's have a look. We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. Government officials in eastern Kenya have expressed concern over a second wave of locust invasions after the pests attacked local farms. They say the locusts have destroyed much-needed food crops in the area. CGTN's Nick Mudimba reports.
When Kenya's first wave of locust invasions in decades was reported, many farmers were left counting huge losses. And in eastern Kenya, people are now worried that a second invasion of the pests could be currently underway. Farmers in Kitui County are now calling for help.
The locals have destroyed cowpeas, vegetables, green grams and maize plantations. They are not eating much grass. They are targeting what you've planted. We have been using crude methods to chase them away, like shouting and using leaves.
But even as the Kenyan government battles the locusts, farmers here are already counting losses.
We came together as farmers to chase the locusts away as a group. There were so many in one garden that it was impossible for one person to chase them.
According to the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization, immature swarms continue to arrive in Kenya and spread throughout the northern region. Swarms have so far been spotted in at least 4 counties.
What we're doing is to help these farmers on what we call livelihood protection and recovery. Protection is on what livelihood is left after the invasion. You want to protect that so that it doesn't degenerate further. And recovery is what was lost. So you want to bring them back to where they were. Yeah, so what we're looking at now is to support the farmers first, maybe through various means. So one of them would be like cash transfers. Some conditional, some unconditional. Where conditional, you'd say, we will support you as a farm household with X amount, and this amount has to specifically go in purchase of, say, seeds, or you do the purchase of seed and distribute, so that these farmers can easily get what they can plant for the next season.
FAO says dry conditions in areas where the swarms are arriving will see them spread throughout southern Ethiopia and northern Kenya. There's a moderate risk that a few swarms could also reach central Kenya and parts of Tanzania, Uganda and even South Sudan by early 2021. It says that once swarms arrive in favorable areas, they will mature and lay eggs that will hatch and cause hopper buds to form in February and March. With trained scouts very integrally important to disseminate information about locusts, many farmers are requesting for capacity building so that they can tackle the problem firsthand on the spot, the locusts. For this will actually reduce
quick losses they're making once the Locust attack their farms. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Kitui County, Kenya.
Somalia is among several countries that have welcomed the lifting of a travel ban imposed by the former U.S. administration under Donald Trump. Thousands of families are now rejoicing at the possibility of reuniting with their loved ones. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo has more from Mogadishu.
On his first day in office, U.S. President Joe Biden ended the infamous travel ban imposed by his predecessor on predominant Muslim countries 4 years ago. President Biden signed the executive order in the Oval Office shortly after taking oath to become the country's 46th president. Instead, the new administration says it will improve the screening of visitors by strengthening information sharing with foreign governments and other measures. Somalia was among several countries whose citizens were banned from traveling to the United States. The ban also affected the refugee resettlement program, denying thousands of families a chance at reuniting with their loved ones in the U.S.
The travel ban separated families, with some having their families left behind in Africa. A clear example is my nephew, whose parents are in the US while he remains stranded in Ethiopia. The lifting of the ban is an important step. I hope he rejoins his parents soon.
The ban affected many Muslims across the globe. Some were heading to the US for scholarship, while others had won the lottery but were unable to travel in the past 4 years because of the ban imposed by the former US administration.
The federal government has welcomed the lifting of the travel ban, arguing that it was issued without proper assessment.
It was a rushed decision based on no evidence or research. We welcome the end of the travel ban on Somalia and all other Muslim countries involved. It is good to see the new administration under Joe Biden reversing the previous bans since they were based on unfounded allegations.
In 2019, Washington reopened its Mogadishu embassy for the first time in 3 decades. The new embassy building is located inside the heavily fortified Mogadishu International Airport compound. Somalia now hopes that the lifting of travel restriction signals the new administration's commitment to strengthening security and economic ties between the two countries.
We expect continued relations between our two countries. We will remain a key U.S. ally and a reliable security partner. We look forward to American investment in the hydrocarbon sector, and in general, we want the Biden administration to look at Somalia through a different lens from that of his predecessor.
Earlier this month, American troops were withdrawn from the country after former President Donald Trump issued an executive order that saw more than 700 armed personnel redeployed to other bases in East Africa. Security experts now hope that the new administration will reverse this decision and deploy American troops on the ground in order to preserve security gains recorded over the years against insurgent groups. Abdulaziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Senegal is battling a second wave of COVID-19 infections and deaths. Health officials in the country have announced vaccines are just weeks away, but they are faced with growing concerns among Senegalese citizens who are reluctant to be inoculated. CGTN's Joy Kirukijuma reports.
A second wave of COVID-19 infections in Senegal. Health authorities in the country say a vaccination exercise will begin before end of March. Priority, though, will be given to persons over 60 years old, among other vulnerable populations.
The trials we've done are to see if there are any side effects. This has not been detected in the COVID-19 vaccines we currently have. Since the beginning of the pandemic, people have been trying to find the weapons to fight the disease effectively, but have not found them. But today we have all realized that the most lethal weapon to eradicate this pandemic is vaccination. It is important to know that the benefit far outweighs the risk, so I'm asking all Senegalese to agree to be vaccinated.
Side effects of the COVID-19 vaccines, according to health officials, are not severe and only last 24 hours. However, health authorities are facing the challenge of convincing members of its populace who are reluctant to be vaccinated. Professor Dieye explains the different phases of vaccine trials.
Before, people used to do a phase 1 trial and it took a year. Now people combine phase 1 and 2 because it's the same thing. Phase 1 is a limited number of doses working on the safety of the vaccine so that it doesn't cause a problem for the population, that it doesn't kill. Phase 2 is similar to phase 1 but with a higher number of doses. It also makes it possible to vary the doses. Phase 3 is the efficacy phase, which has been combined with phase 2. It consists of putting together a group of people who are not receiving vaccines as opposed to a group that is receiving the vaccine. And if in the group that has been vaccinated, the number of contaminated people is very low, this allows us to have a good estimate of the vaccine's effectiveness at 95% or more.
Senegal currently has over 24,000 cases of COVID-19. To tame further spread, President Macky Sall has reimposed a state of emergency. The restrictions prohibit public gathering, impose wearing of masks, and reintroduction of a curfew system. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
To some tech news now. Although user backlash forced WhatsApp to delay the introduction of a new data privacy policy announced earlier this month, some users in Africa are still concerned about what the changes could mean once they come into effect. CGTN's Julie Shire now brings us the reactions from some South African users of WhatsApp.
WhatsApp is facing a severe backlash over its new privacy policy. South Africans feel the platform has gone too far by allowing parent company Facebook unfettered access to user profiles, statuses and contacts.
Facebook is not collecting information about your conversations per se, but it certainly collects information about who you converse with, how long you converse, and also your behavior in terms of visiting sites or searching for news. Advertisers looking for certain characteristics of users can start targeting those users in a way that can become incredibly invasive.
WhatsApp is South Africa's favorite app, but many have threatened to abandon the platform completely if they're forced to accept its new data policy.
I'm not feeling comfortable with it because WhatsApp is a private social platform. What needed to be Facebook is on Facebook already, so why take what's on WhatsApp to Facebook? It's absolutely unnecessary, and I think they should review everything.
I'm leaving WhatsApp. I'm going for Telegram because WhatsApp is going to share our information to Facebook. Obviously on Facebook, it's going to disclose much information to the public.
The public outcry prompted South Africa's information regulator to look into the matter. South Africa's new Protection of Personal Act, which takes effect in July, is tightening the screws on data security.
The fact that your personal information will be shared amongst the family of companies of Facebook, and that's a huge concern. If our analysis point to the fact that there are serious contraventions of the Protection of Personal Information Act, then we would then ensure by way of our engagements that we enforce the law.
There's been mass adoption of other platforms such as Telegram and Signal in recent weeks, but some South Africans think the fuss is unnecessary.
I don't think it's nearly as much of a big deal as everyone's making it out to be, because obviously our information is already being given around to anyone. If you're using Google, every time you search for something, they know. And if you have Instagram or Facebook already, then Facebook has your information.
There's no information of mine that is not already circulating in the system somewhere. Telemarketers, they call us anytime. I don't remember giving my details to them. Facebook is there, social media is there. So I'm just not sure how unsafe it is for one to have personal details and information with WhatsApp while the rest of the information is already circulating somewhere.
WhatsApp has delayed implementation of its terms until May this year. It may have to tweak its policy if found transgressing South African laws, which protects personal information from being abused for commercial gain. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Life as a deaf person in Tanzania is challenging. Very few public spaces have sign language interpreters available for the deaf. often leaving the country's more than 500,000 with hearing impairments feeling left out. But one church in Tanzania is trying to change that by making it possible for the deaf community to enjoy and participate in its services. CGTN's Isaac Lokando has more.
Despite being surrounded by loud music, members of this church are all deaf. With a congregation of more than 500 members across Tanzania, the Emmanuel Church of the Deaf has been around since 1997. But the church's Secretary General in Dar es Salaam says societal beliefs are hampering the church's growth.
Most people believe that a deaf person cannot do anything. This is not true. Some think that if a deaf person goes to church, they may get in an accident on their way there. Maybe a car will hoot and that person won't be able to hear. So there are doubts. They end up being told to stay at home or to accompany relatives elsewhere.
Members here say being able to communicate with each other has given them a sense of community. Godfrey Nyansika has been a church member since 2010.
There are clubs for the deaf here in Dar es Salaam. I happened to meet a deaf person at that club. I asked them about the church and they brought me here. I felt that it was better to worship here than where I was before, because there I did not understand anything. But here I understand everything.
According to the Tanzania Association for the Deaf, Chavita, deaf people in the country are more likely to have incomes below the poverty line. They also tend to be excluded from social services and are segregated and discriminated against.
According to government statistics, 12 out of every 1,000 Tanzanians suffer from a hearing impairment. With slightly over half of the country's deaf population not able to read and write, exposure to scriptures in a religious establishment like this church gives them access to some form of education and a sense of normalcy in their lives.
To aid those who can't read or write, the church has developed its own language consisting of symbols. The church's sign language interpreter says deaf people need to be able to communicate in other places too.
Everywhere you meet people with disabilities, especially the deaf. The major cry is for more sign language interpreters. They lament that there aren't any in hospitals, in courts. When deaf people want to give birth in the hospitals, they meet nurses and doctors who don't know sign language. So they want interpreters to help to communicate their needs with the doctor or nurse.
The church is currently in 5 regions in Tanzania. Its leaders say they have plans for further expansion. They say they want to give deaf people in the country a means of expression in what is otherwise a quiet world for them. Isaac Lokando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
You're watching Africa Live, your business news coming up next. Coming up, China is now the world's largest recipient of foreign direct investment. And Google may soon make its way out of Australia.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 14 hours of rain.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues for taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
In your business news, China has surpassed the United States in foreign direct investment in 2020. It made the country the largest recipient of FDI in a year stricken by the pandemic. CGTN's Timothy Ulrich has the details.
China was the largest recipient of foreign direct investment in 2020. According to the report by the UN's Conference on Trade and Development, the Chinese economy brought in $163 billion in inflows, surpassing the United States, which attracted $134 billion. It said foreign investors were impressed by the way China has handled the outbreak of COVID-19.
China succeeded in combating the impact of the pandemic. As global FDI plummeted, foreign direct investment received by China increased throughout the past year.
The world economy took a battering in 2020 due to the pandemic. Overall, global FDI collapsed, dropping a massive 42% to $859 billion. To put that into context, it was a 30% fall from even the lows of the 2009 financial crisis. The one bright spark was China's recovery and how it attracted global investment. Many European companies say they want to continue investing in the Chinese market. Experts say it could lead to a much greater expansion of the Chinese economy in 2021. Timothy Ulrich, CGTN.
The U.S. has registered more than 25 million COVID-19 infections, accounting for more than a quarter of the world's total cases. President Joe Biden is expected to ban most non-U.S. citizens who have recently traveled to South Africa from entering the country. The measure will take effect starting Saturday. Biden is also reactivating an entry ban on nearly all non-U.S. travelers who've been in Brazil, Britain, Ireland, and 26 other European nations, allowing travel across open borders. A U.S. CDC official says the new restrictions are to protect Americans from getting infected and reduce the risk of mutations spreading in the country. Edith Tianzen has more.
We are at that grim milestone with nearly 25 million cases, and that's about a quarter of all of the world's confirmed cases right here in the United States. And that unfortunately comes at a time when now nearly 40% of Americans live in areas where the ICU capacities have fallen down to 15% or even lower. Now, some states are reporting new infections and hospitalizations that are lower than the previous weeks, but experts are cautious to call that good news because of this new variant of the coronavirus. And we're talking about not just the one that was initially identified in the United Kingdom, but one that scientists here in California believe could be homegrown. I mean, they identified one particular strain they say is by far the most contagious among all of the strains that have been identified around the world so far. And one particular concern is about detecting it, because there are so many different testing methods right now out there that health experts are wondering whether they will all be effective in detecting this virus when tested. Now, obviously, it also comes at a critical time of mass vaccination efforts. We have heard from President Joe Biden saying that this was going to be the biggest operational challenge the nation had ever faced, trying to inoculate 100 million in his first 100 days in office. But we've also heard from Javier Becerra, essentially nominated to lead the Health and Human Services Department, saying that this is going to take some time.
The plane is in a nosedive, and we got to pull it up. And you're not going to do that overnight. But we're going to pull it up. We have to pull it up. Failure is not an option here, and so we will. That's where President Biden made it very clear. It won't happen overnight. We can do better. We can not only control COVID, but get us back to real normality. But it takes everybody, all hands on deck.
And there's definitely a sort of last-minute scrambling for resources for this administration right now, as we're hearing several states are already reporting critical shortages in their vaccination supplies. They've already had to cancel thousands of appointments in multiple states. The Biden administration is essentially planning to inject billions of dollars, both in terms of testing and vaccination efforts, trying to bring about a more unified and consistent mechanism that would have a greater federal oversight. It is Tian Shan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
Egypt has signed a memorandum of understanding with Germany's Siemens for the construction of a high-speed electric train line. The 2,000-kilometer railway network will cut across the North African nation and will cost $23 billion. It will be the most expensive project in the history of Egypt's transport industry. Here's Yasser Hakim with the details from Cairo.
The project is not just a train line. It is an integrated system of a high-speed electric railway network that will be linking the whole country with a total length of 2,000 kilometers at a total speed of 250 kilometers per hour. The first phase will be an $8 billion 460-kilometer route linking Al Alamein on the Mediterranean Sea in the north to Ain al-Sukhna on the Red Sea and passing through the new capital. Upon completion, the new high-speed train will cut the duration of that trip by more than half.
The project has several benefits. First is to transport passengers and goods. Secondly, it will promote tourism with a line that connects Luxor to Hurghada. As for businesses, it will increase the amount of goods to be transported and which will be connected to ports and industrial cities to ease their delivery. There is also the environmental aspect as it's an electric train. The project will create 15,000 job opportunities and 2,000 permanent jobs.
Siemens will be responsible for all of the project's electromechanical functions, as well as producing and delivery of 34 passenger trains and 10 goods carriages. Local companies have already started work on the landmark $23 billion project, with the first phase to be concluded in 2023.
We live on only 4 or 5% of our land. We want to spread out and occupy over 7 and 9%. This needs action and not talk. That's what we are going to do. One train line will connect to Aswan, which is 850 kilometers away. I'm doing it for the people who live on that route, who are a majority of the railway users. When you ask about the cost, it's nothing compared to what we aim to achieve with our targets.
Payments to Siemens will be due 6 years after the project has begun, and the first phase should be ready in 2 years' time. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Camel breeding is an age-old tradition in the Arab world. The dromedary species is the most popular and is estimated to make up about 95% rather, of the world's camel population. In Algeria, the government is encouraging its citizens to embrace camel rearing. CGTN's Wanja Mungai brings us the story of one herder who's doing just that.
Early morning in the outskirts of the Algerian capital, Algiers, 56-year-old Haj Said Nasruddin gets on with his daily routine. Like many people in his country, he's not new to this trade.
I've been specializing in camel raising and milk production for years.
The father of 5 milks his camel twice a day and gets about 50 liters of milk in total. However, rearing a herd of 20 of these animals, which are also known as the sheep of the desert, has not been without challenges.
Camel milk is very popular and has a market value that expands with time. And despite the many problems that I encounter, such as the difficulty of providing feed for the camels and following up on the health that's needed, I, like many other breeders, still need help from the Algerian government.
He rears the dromedary species or the Arabian camel. The variety is common in the Arab world and most of the sub-Saharan Africa. According to National Geographic, the species makes up about 95% of the world's camel population. Characterized by a single hump, an average mature dromedary camel can grow up to 7 feet and usually weighs over 700 kilograms. In his culture, camel milk is treasured as a nutritious delicacy and a moneymaker. The Healthline website reports that its calorie and fat content are equal to that found in cow milk. However, camel milk has more vitamins, calcium, iron and potassium. The milk is also known as desert gold, owing to its numerous uses in food production. Breeders, however, are faced with challenges of providing proper and sufficient fodder to their animals. Also, the prevalence of diseases that affect the camels is another problem.
As a veterinarian, I am trying to help the breeders here by providing medicine and advice that prevents disease in livestock, which reduce their milk production. The increased demand for camel milk must be matched with consistent health monitoring every day.
the government of Algeria has been encouraging citizens to embrace camel keeping. For Nesreddin, he hopes that support from the government will help his herd become larger and much healthier. Wanjamungai, CGTN.
Australians are bracing for a possible future without Google. This amidst a fight between the federal government and Alphabet Inc.'s Google. Google has threatened to block its search engine in Australia if the government proceeds with a new code that would force it and Facebook to pay media companies for the right to use their content.
Google has vowed to block users in Australia from posting or sharing links to news if the bill that would force tech companies to pay for journalism shared on its platforms was passed.
Of course they should pay. The proposition before the Australian Parliament is the product of 18 months of rigorous policy development. It's got the support of all the major parties. It's endorsed by all the major news organisations. This is good policy to regulate big tech.
This development is tied to the News Media Bargaining Code, a mandatory code of conduct to tackle bargaining power imbalances between the Australian news media businesses and digital platforms.
We operate in a democracy where our elected representatives set the laws. When there's good policy behind it, it's kind of up to all businesses to find a way of operating. I hope Google finds a way of respecting their users in Australia and recognising that a network like Google, and for that matter like Facebook, is only as strong as the people that use it.
Google has about 90 to 90% of the search engine market share in Australia, similar to the rest of the world. And its search technology also powers services such as Gmail, Google Maps and YouTube.
It is a bit of a worry, isn't it? But, as I say, what can we do about it?
Most of the businesses we get for our online coming through Google Ads, Google Analytica coming through. So it'll be interesting to see how things pan out. It's just the start of it, so let's just see.
Australia's firm stance to challenge online giants puts the nation as a forerunner in the campaign to regulate tech companies.
Well, I think if a business wants to do, or if a company wants to do business in Australia, then they should adhere to whatever our laws are. If the government is saying they want them to pay for the news content, then yeah, they should pay, because if they want to do business here, that's our rules.
Google has called the code overly broad and said that without revisions, offering even a limited search tool would be too risky. The company does not disclose sales from Australia, but search ads are its biggest contributor to revenue and profit globally. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
You're watching Africa Live. Let's take a short break. When we come back, we find out why a particular species of whales is becoming rare in South African waters.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
We start in South Africa now, where experts are worried that some whales may be too tired to migrate to the country's waters to calve. They've noted that the number of southern right whales on South African waters has dropped over the last 10 years due to challenges they experience in areas where they usually find food. CGTN's Travis Andrews explains.
Every year, southern white whales migrate from the cold waters of Antarctica to the warm shallows of Walker Bay in the Western Cape to give birth. Over the last decade, though, their numbers have fallen. That drop has been attributed to issues such as decreased availability of food and failure to attain the overall body conditions necessary to calve.
These are animals that migrate from the subantarctic, where they feed during the summer and autumn months, and they come into local waters, local South African waters during winter and spring to have their calves. A female will only have a calf if she is fat enough, if she has had enough food in order to go into the reproductive cycle. And that extension of the reproductive cycle from 3 years to 4 to 5 years, we think is due to some issues regarding food availability within the Southern Ocean.
From 2009, experts noted a decline in the number of southern white whales migrating without calves. Then from the year 2015, there was a decline in the number of whales with calves. Whale experts believe that while the animals haven't completely moved away, they have shifted their timing.
Now, southern whites come to the South African coast. They calve, the females calve once every third year. And so what we've seen is that interval between calves has increased to 4 years and even to 5 years. So there's been a shift in timing as opposed to a complete move away from the coast. So associated obviously with that shift in timing, there's a slight decline in the increase rate. It's dropped from about 7% per annum to probably just under 6%.
The location of the whale's prey may be linked to issues such as climate change, which could play a role in rising sea temperatures, which in turn may divert their food to distant areas. The drop in whale numbers is not just a concerning conservational issue, it's also an economic one, because marine mammals are important contributors to the Western Cape's ocean's economy, and without them, the industries such as the tourism sector could take a serious knock. Davos, CGTN, Cape Town.
Your sports news after the break. Coming up, Manchester United knock out bitter rivals Liverpool from the English FA Cup to book a spot in the round of 16.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
We start your sports news with football. Manchester United deepened Liverpool's January gloom